Hi, my name is Katie, and I'm the driver for this session, and I'm here with.
Hey, this is Lindo. I'll be the navigator for this session.
Okay, so today we are covering chapter 5, where we had a login page and where we can see the users in our SQL database. So right now I'm going to register a user, so we'll just call it David. Password 123 123. Full name, go with David. Give it the street address, the dummy data, and then we're going to now log the user in. Okay, so now the user is logged in and they are now at the home page, and now I can also go to the ingredient page as well. Also, here we have the database for the SQL, so I'm going to connect, and now we can see all the users. So I'm just going to type in the command, and then we can see the name, David, phone number, state, street, username, zip, and the unique ID. Now going into the code, it's quite a mess, but I'm going to just give me a second. But as I was saying, yeah, I'm just going to explain the code and how everything works. Okay. So here we have our controller called the registration. It's just going to handle the user's registration request, and it's also going to integrate. So it's also going to integrate with Spring Security to encode passwords before saving the users. Um, Okay, moving on into the app, here we have our constructor injection for the dependencies. Spring will automatically wire the user repository and the password encoder with beans. Next, we have our get mapping. So this is just going to display the registration form mapped to the get register, and then it's going to return the name of the timeleaf template for the registration. Lastly, we do have our post mapping over here. So it's going to process the submitted registration form. It's going to convert the form into a user object, and it's going to encode the password and then save it. And then we have the Spring Security behavior. So the password encoder hashes the raw password before storage. The saved user can later be authenticated via Spring Security login flow. Also, we have the parent form with the submitted registration form containing the user's input. And then we also have the return redirect. It's going to redirect the user to the login page after a successful registration, like I did show in the demo earlier. So here we have our registration form. So, so here we have the detail for capturing user input during registration, and then it's going to convert the form fields into a user entity with the encoder password. Here we just have all the fields collected from the registration form. So the username, the password, full name, the street, city, state, zip, and phone. Next, if we take a look over here, so this is going to convert. Here we have the to user password encoder and return new user. So this is going to convert the form into a user entity using Spring Security and password encoder to hash the password before the storage. And then we have the parent password encoder. The encoder is used to securely hash the password, and then the return is a new user object ready for the persistence. Then we have the registration controller. This file is going to handle the user's registration, so it's going to integrate with Spring Security encoder passwords before saving the users. Here we have the request mapping register. This is just going to map all the requests under the register to this controller. And then here we have the user repo. Sorry. So the user repo is a repository for the persisting user entities. And then we have the password encoder. This is used to securely hash user passwords. Next, we're moving on, we have the registration controller. So this is a constructor injection of dependencies. Spring will automatically wire the user repository to the password beans. Next, this is where we have the get mapping. So this is just going to display the registration form and it's going to map the get or the register. And then we also have our return. So this is just the name of the time leaf template, the time leaf template for the registration. Next, we have our post mapping over here. So this is just going to convert the form into a user object, encodes the password, and then it's going to save it. Spring security behavior, the password encoder hashes the raw password before the storage, and then the safe user can later be authenticated via the Spring security login flow. Then we also have the parent form that is submitted through the registration form containing the user input, and then the return is the redirect to the login page after a successful registration. Yeah, we have the security config. I'll explain now. So, so the configure Spring security for the Taco Cloud application defines the password using encoding, user lookup, and access rules for protected routes. Here we also have our bean for the public password encoder. So this is just going to define the password encoder bean. And then we also have the bicrypt um, password encoder. So this is a strong hashing algorithm used to securely store passwords. Here we have our public user detail server. So the custom user detail server bean that loads users from the MongoDB via the user repository required by Spring Security to authenticate users during the login. Param user repo, the repository used to look up users by their username, and then it's going to return a lambda that returns a user or throw an exception if it's not found. Moving on, we have our user.java. So this is going to represent an authenticated user in the Docker Cloud system. Also going to implement Spring Security user detail interface for login and role-based access. Persisted as a GPA entity in the users table. Okay, here we have the table for users. This is just going to avoid conflict with the SQL reserve keyword for users. Thus, is or the no args constructor is required by the GPA, and the required args constructor is used by the registration form to construct a new user. Moving into the code, here we have the ID generate values. So this is just going to auto-generate a primary key. Here we just have the required fields for the authentication and the user profile. And then lastly, here we're just going to return all the users granted authorities. All users are assigned to the role user authority by default. Next, we have a variable public boolean is account unexpired, return true. So the account status flags or return true for simplicity. And then yeah, we just have a boolean to make sure the account is not locked, as well as the credentials is not expired and the profile should be enabled. Here we have our login HTML. Here we just display the logo for the Taco Cloud. Here it's just going to display an error message if the login fails. Here we have a link to the registration page for new users. This is the form that submits to Spring Security default login endpoint. This is the username input field. Here we also have the password input field and a submit button after logging in. And then lastly, we have the registration template. So this is a link to the login page for existing users. Here we have a registration form. So here it's going to submit a post register handled by the registration controller. Here we have the username input, the password input, Yeah, we confirm the password input and it's not validated server side by default. And then we have the input for the name, the input for the address, the input for the city, the input for the state, the input for the zip, the input for the phone number, and then we have our submit button for the register. Now, I covered everything for this chapter. Thank you for watching.